external awareness. We want to talk a little bit about loving kindness this morning. And loving kindness practice is it's really opening our hearts to expand our capacity to experience, to give, to receive love. And the thing that's different from feeling loving and practicing loving kindness is that we can practice loving kindness even when we don't feel loving at all. Because as soon as we decide to expand our capacity for love, what happens is we usually encounter all our difficulties with loving. And can we love the difficulties, love ourselves throughout those difficulties? We don't usually realize how much our emotions can be chosen, strengthened, cultivated, because it feels that they just come upon us unbidden. And often it just is like that. But it's also true that the more we meditate and the more we learn to observe the process that's happening in our own minds, the more we begin to see that actually we co-create the emotions, that things happen and we are part of our reaction to what's happening. Well, here, let me give you an example. So the other day I was talking to a friend I hadn't spoken to for a long time, and we got onto, we shouldn't have, but we got onto this topic of politics, which may happen as you greet old friends and people you haven't seen for a long time. And the conversation went from, difficult political things, we'll just say, to more difficult political things, and then on to climate change and, racism and homophobia, just on until, and really, she was the one who was kind of bringing up these subjects, but I was definitely in there with her. And eventually we both realized, we stopped talking and both realized we were completely depressed. Just in that moment, just feeling like, oh my God. But that's an example of creating an emotion together. We were not in that. We were happy, we hadn't been in touch, happy, catch up, speak to each other. And the intention to create that emotion was not there because we just weren't aware exactly of what we were doing and where it was inevitably headed. And with metta practice, as Jack was offering various invitations to cultivate and strengthen this feeling of loving kindness, we can see that it's intentional. And because it's intentional doesn't make it less powerful, actually. The intention to cultivate love and repeating these phrases, inclining our hearts in that direction, understanding that the phrases are not empty words, but actually they carry the energy of intention with them. We sometimes say each phrase plants a seed of intention to be able to experience more love. That as we do that and strengthen the intention to be more loving, lo and behold, it is powerful and real, and it can happen. There was nothing in my training as a psychotherapist that taught me that you could deliberately evoke and strengthen particular emotions, and that they would be authentic. And it kind of reminds me, during the years when I was doing a lot of couples therapy, often one person in the couple, and it was usually in a heterosexual couple, it would be usually the female, just sort of stereotypical gender roles, would be asking for something like, oh, I'd like to know you think of me during the day. I don't know if you ever saw this New Yorker cartoon of, again, this is a heterosexist example, but the example of the pie chart of what men think about and what women think about all day long. all I'll say about that is that in the women's pie chart, relationship was like that much. In the men's pie chart, it was about like that much. Now, again, total, gender stereotypical humor, but the woman would often be saying, or the person in the couple, let's say, who's the most craving closeness, often in couples, and this is independent of gender identification, there's what we would call the pursuer and the distancer. And the space between the two people, stays remarkably the same, actually. Because when the pursuer moves forward, the distancer moves away. You've all experienced this, right? And then when the distancer, through therapy or just love, decides to try and mend their ways and moves closer, well, guess what the pursuer often does? Right, moves away. A perfect example of that would be the person, let's say, who wants more closeness. You could just sometimes show me you've been thinking of me during the day, maybe bring home some flowers or something like this. And then the person will do that, the other one. And then the requester of the flowers will say, yeah, but I had to ask. Right? So that's the distancing of the pursuer. Yeah, I had to ask, so it doesn't count in some way. But if you ask somebody for something and they give you that thing, that's actually an act of love. That's a generous, loving gift. They're trying to make you happy. You've said what makes you happy, and they are trying to give you what you've said would make you happy. So how we cultivate our capacity to love is by beginning to recognize our responsibility and our role in the love that we have or don't have in our lives. And a beautiful example is our friend Mag Diamond is visiting from San Francisco. She's actually going to do, I think I left it out on the counter. Did I bring it in? Yes. She's actually going to do, we're going to introduce her book and do a little reading early this afternoon after the second sitting group. And she wrote a book called Bowing to Elephants. And its subtitle is Tales of a Travel Junkie. And I think Mag is a perfect example because she grew up sort of the stereotypical poor little rich girl. She traveled in different places, and her mother had income from a trust fund and would kind of pick her up and plop her in a school for a year and then take her somewhere else, plop her in a different school. And the mom really didn't know how to be a mom. She would bring a lovely tray to Meg's lovely room with an aluminum TV dinner on it and plop it down there. And then she would go off in her room if she didn't have a party to go to and read her movie magazines. And she just didn't know how to relate to her little girl, who, of course, was hungry for love and looking for love. And she did find other people, the friend, the mother of a friend, or the way children do when they aren't finding the love they need at home. Hopefully we'll find it in other places. But to me, Mag's life, and the book isn't just a travel, it's a memoir. It's really beautiful. Mag's life is an example of and her travels are an example to me of all the places she was looking for love. She calls it bowing to elephants because she really discovered elephant-human love when she was living in Africa. And she describes her love for the giant elephants, but she also describes her love for the food in all the different places, and her descriptions of the food just make you want to go outside and sprinkle olive oil all over the grass and start eating it. I mean, it's just it's just so delicious, and especially the olive oil. There's a lot of olive oil, like really, thick green Italian olive oil in this book, but also hungry people and everything. It's really an expression of how we can, when we want love, we may not realize that we're traveling in on a pilgrimage to open our hearts and find love where we can. But we are, and we do. And this book I love because it expresses finding love in all sorts of places where we don't imagine there is. For example, finding love in a beautiful, in the light, in an arched, beautiful arched doorway, or finding love by the willingness to move out and explore the world and just see what's there for us to love. Anyway, we'll talk more about the book this afternoon, but she's a wonderful, wonderful writer, and I felt my own heart opened, and it was a reminder to me to not to shut down and imagine that there are places that have love and places that don't. Because guess what? The love actually resides in here, in our own hearts. And you know how when you're in love, if you ever have that luck of falling in love or even having a big crush on somebody, the whole world starts to look brighter, and there's songs about this, lovers loving the whole world and each other. But our spiritual practice is actually about falling in love with ourselves, with our world, and loving ourselves and our world even through the difficulties. Learning how to stay connected through the disconnections. That's really key. And like when Jack was introducing the different categories of beings to whom we could extend love, one of the categories in the ancient texts is called the enemy. Now, hopefully you don't have real enemies in your life. You might have one or two, but hopefully you don't. But there are difficult people who just annoy us, who just bug us, who just do things that seem thoughtless and mindless and inconsiderate. And we have a cascade of judgment that arises in the face of what we determine are those kinds of behaviors. Okay, can we extend, if not love, at least can we free our own hearts from the annoyance, etc., that we feel? But what I think is more interesting is, can we extend love to the difficult parts of ourselves? The parts of ourselves that annoy us. I have seen the enemy, and it is me. You know, when the parts of ourselves that undermine us, that we shoot ourselves in the foot, or we sabotage the very thing that we want in some little way, or sometimes in some big way. So how do we love throughout the disconnections? And many people have already gone, and many of you will go see family on Christmas, or is tonight the first night of Hanukkah, I think? Or tonight on the first night of Hanukkah. You will be visiting family, and you know, our families, it's like entering a monastery or any kind of intentional community. You find yourself living with people you didn't choose. Now, I ran into a woman at the gym I hadn't seen for a long time who told me in the course of our conversation, it came up, I said, "You must have had a wonderful mother. She was all decked out. She had all lipstick and eye makeup and a darling gym outfit." And I'm, of course, you know, my schleppy self. And I said, "Wow, you really dress up to come to the gym." I said, "Oh, my mother loves beauty, and she always made sure when she went out she looked pretty." I mean, she obviously loved her mother, and this was a fun thing they shared. And I said, "You must have had a really nice mom." She said, "Yes, when I was 2, I had a vivid memory of being in the vast, vast nowhere and choosing her." That's unusual. And I was told that my dad was going to be a piece of work, but I wanted that mother so bad that I just was born to her anyway. And I thought, okay, that's amazing that you can remember that. But most of us don't remember, and most of us don't have the sense that we chose the parents that we have, or if we did, we don't know why we did. We can't, you know, it seemed like a good idea at the time. But we're going to find ourselves, hopefully, with some family. And how do we love and listen to each other through what feels like abysses and chasms and impossible distances? This practice actually helps. But don't think you have to offer love to the person who's annoying you right in the moment. Offer love to yourself, because you're the one who's annoyed. They're fine. They're just annoying you. But they're not doing it intentionally, usually. Unless they're your brother or sister. They're not doing it intentionally. I mean your teenage brother and sister, of course. But so this is the season to practice self-compassion, to practice loving kindness, to practice whatever we can do to be able to muster the strength and presence to listen to each other, to want to learn from each other, to be curious about each other. I was on an airplane quite a while ago, years ago, and next to me was this, looked like maybe 17-year-old boy. He was a young man. He was working on homework. It was all about Jesus. I could see on his notebook. And so I was curious, and we started a conversation. And I was really interested in what he was learning. I think he was from South Carolina. And then at one point, he was talking about liberals and how much he hates liberals. Hates liberals. And I asked him if he knew any liberals. And he said, not really. And I said, well, I'm a liberal. So we began, it just showed me this importance of listening to each other. And when we listen with curiosity and attentiveness, and in the spirit that Mag brought to her travels, as she was bowing to elephants, we can really create some moment of more loving connection. And that's some of what I want to share with you this morning. It's a mixed blessing to have Jack here. I'm so happy to have him here, but then I have to share. That's part of being married. You have to learn to share. It's your turn. I'm sharing. I can keep going if you...
It should be short, right? Looking at our time.
Oh.
Remember? I should be, right? I should be short.
I overshared.
No, you didn't overshare. I was completely with you. But anyway, all right.
I'm sorry.
No,
you can talk first next time.
I loved it. I really enjoyed it. So here we are. It's not only the first night of Hanukkah, but it's the solstice. The still point of the turning world, the day that in some way, in the archetypal imagination, the sun stands still and then it decides to come back again as it's been disappearing. And it's a perfect time to get quiet, as we just sat, and to take some quiet time for yourself in this season. And listen to something bigger, some of the bigger movements of life, of the vastness of it. Yes, there are a lot of troubles in the world that we're quite aware of and have to tend, and in fact, and that are really important for us to tend. Humanity's always had troubles. It's not a new thing. We're survivors. You have generations of ancestors that went through troubles to get you here. And so we have to do it again. But there's also something bigger. That famous Ojibwa saying, sometimes I go about pitying myself when all the while I'm being carried by great winds across the sky. When you get quiet in this time and feel the arc of your life and all our lives and the earth, there is also a sense of openness or vastness. What will I do? What seeds will I plant in this time of both difficulty and opportunity? And the Buddhist texts, some of them anyway, begin with this phrase, "O nobly born," kind of an address to the person who's listening. "O you who are the sons and daughters of the awakened ones, do not forget who you really are. Don't forget that you are born with an inherent dignity, that you're born with a heart that can extend love to yourself and the whole world, that these are your birthright, that these are your capacities. And we need to remember this as in this season and in this time particularly. How many of you were at the InsightLA benefit that we had last week? So, yeah, a third or more of you. It was a really beautiful benefit. And Trudy and I had just come back from teaching a week with Ram Dass in Hawaii, our dear friend who's now 88, frail in some ways, can't speak much, in his wheelchair. And we taught meditation, and Krishna Das chanted, and it was a kind of devotional retreat in many ways. And Ram Dass was there, but not able to speak much. And at the end, they have this mala ceremony where Ram Dass gives everybody a little wrist mala of beads with a thread from his guru's blanket. And his guru represents and was for him the kind of the fountain of love in some way. And Ram Dass has become so tenderized in these years in his wheelchair and all his practice that he says when he can speak, I love everything. I love you all. I love the camera. I love the people behind it who are listening. I love the white fuzzy vest from Ross, you know.
That you didn't really want me to buy.
I thought it was tacky, but I now come to really love it. I love your, mustard-colored bag and the floor and the plants, and he would just go on and on and on. And he wasn't just saying, he meant it. So at the end, when people were filing by, and he blessed these malas, and then someone else was handing them to each person, he would just gaze at each person as they went by, and offer a kind of blessing. And people would just start to weep. I was sitting in front. It was the most kind of magic thing, because there was such purity to that love, and people were like drinking it in. I was looking at it and thinking about, I've talked about it here before, the Christian mystic Thomas Merton. There's a official government plaque at 4th and Walnut Street in Louisville, Kentucky, where he had gone out from his Gethsemane monastery to do errands, and he was walking down the street in Louisville. He said, and all of a sudden I realized that the holiness was not in my monastery. It was in the sky and the trees, but especially it was the secret beauty behind the eyes of everybody walking by. And everything became illuminated, he said. And when I could see that way, he said, if we could see each other that way, there'd be no more need for war or greed or hatred or cruelty. He said, I suppose the big problem, we would fall down and worship each other. So there's this plaque that kind of honors this beautiful mystical experience. And I was watching Ram Dass and feeling that and thinking, okay, this is what Thomas Merton saw. And I want to live that way. I want to see that. And then I began to play with it, as we do with metta. You actually can play with it. And I noticed that there are different lenses. We can put on all kinds of lenses. The vast lens of the Ojibwa, the moon and the planets are turning and the stars and so forth, and there's something spacious. So I was looking with the lens, and I would see somebody and I'd say, suppose that person were a good friend. How would I feel this kind of love? Well, suppose they were my sister. Oh, the love kind of gets bigger, right? Or my brother, or my father. Suppose that was. And I know you have troubled relationships in family, we all do too, but somehow underneath that love. And then I thought, well, suppose it were my daughter or my son, where it's just or the person I love the most, or my wife, my partner. So excuse me, get this straight.
I've relaxed.
My,
I didn't even
my,
notice when you
my
said
Trudy.
that.
But anyway, suppose, or I'll go back, suppose it were my daughter. And then it changes again. And it gets so real. Oh, God, of course I love her so much. So obviously I love. And then I realized we can do this, just as Trudy was saying. And at the benefit, which was a beautiful kind of celebration of love and service and tending the world. And Sean Korn, yoga teacher, talked about how she'd learned in being in Africa and India, going there to help, that her going to help had a little bit of a colonialist undertow to it in some way. And this very wise person, project she was trying to help in Africa, said, come back when you don't want to help us, when you just want to be with us, when you want to love us, because we don't need people coming to save us or help us, please. And then there was Father Greg Boyle from Homeboy Industries, who's like Ramdas, like one of our heroes, and kind of a very modest, and he has a certain kind of straightforwardness and humility, a very modest and humble saint, basically.
The saint of LA.
And he said, we talked to him, well, how can you do this work? Because there's this kind of undeclared war in the streets and kids shooting each other. He said, that's the worst thing. When kids I love kill kids I love. And you almost couldn't breathe when he said it. It was so amazing. He said, but I can do something. I can make a difference in these kids' lives. And the thing that was so obvious about what he does is that he sees the value in every single one of these kids. He looks to that secret beauty in their eyes, and you could feel it through him, and it changes everything. So this is metta. And I have one story to read, and I'll stop. Is that okay?
Oh yeah, I was looking, when I said kids to him, he said, yeah, and some of them are 68 years old. This is really working with people of all ages.
So this is one of my favorite stories. Ananda, who was the cousin and attendant to the Buddha for the 45 years, or most of the 45 years of his teaching, and was known as kind of the most warm-hearted and kind of all the Buddhists, the disciples at that time, kind of known for being gracious and thoughtful and so forth. He was sent on an errand by the Buddha, and on his way back he came through a village. It was the hot season, and went to the well, and there was a young woman there named Pakati, a young untouchable woman. It's hard to describe what it's like to be born an untouchable, but it means in the caste system that if you go too close to, or even your shadow falls on the food of a high caste person, it has to be thrown out, or you're punished because you're fundamentally impure. If you can imagine a child being taught that. And he asked her for water to drink, because as monastics we're not allowed to ask for anything. When I was a monk, you can't ask for anything, water being the one exception. So, and Pakati replied, she said, O monk, I'm too lowly born to give you water to drink. Do not ask service of me, lest your holiness be contaminated, for I am an outcast. And Ananda replied, I ask not for caste, but for water, please. And the woman's heart leapt joyfully, and she gave Ananda water to drink. He thanked her and went away, and she followed him at a distance. Having heard that he was a disciple of the Buddha, she went to the Blessed One and said, help me, let me live in the place where your disciple Ananda dwells, so I may see him and care for him. For I love Ananda. She fell in love with him at that moment. Happens, And the Blessed One understood the emotions of her heart and said, Pakati, your heart is full of love, but you do not understand your own sentiments. It is not Ananda that you love, but his kindness. Accept then that kindness you've seen him practice toward you, and practice it toward others. And though they say you are born of a lower caste, you will be a model for noble men and noble women. Swerve not from the path of righteousness and love, and you will outshine the royal glory of kings and queens. And I love this story because it's a kind of ancient parable that is a parallel to what I saw in Father Greg and in Ram Dass, that says we can do this, we can practice this, and as you practice it, it gets better, it grows, and it's a beautiful thing. So we'll stop because we have a little time for conversation.
Beautiful, Jack. Thank you. So yes, this is your turn, and also live stream friends, if you have comments or questions or anything you'd like to share from your own practice, Angela will read to us if you type your question. And for everybody here, this, this is your chance to share what's coming up for you as you apply the principles of the practices we do to your everyday life, or any questions you have about your meditation, either this morning or in general. And we will pass a mic so that our live stream friends can hear. They can't see you, don't worry, but they can just hear the question.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for that talk. Some of us come, including me, I love the loving kindness, and I'm just inclining my heart more and more towards it. But I came to this practice from the wisdom side. And then also I see some people are inclined in that, and I know when that wisdom is really cultivated and we are in the moment, the love will naturally arise.
That's right.
So, and I also know the value of intentionally saying it without really feeling it and staying with it for a while. And I'm just wondering if you can unpack the other portion for some of us who may be at this point more inclined toward the wisdom side.
Well, one way to look at it, I'll just say something briefly, Jack may chime in, but one way to look at it is to remember that the phrases, while planting seeds of the intention to grow our capacity to love, they also, the focus on the phrases in the loving kindness practice or the Brahmavihara practices is also concentration, to focus. It's like cherishing that phrase, and then you can think of concentration as cherishing the subject of your concentration, whether it's a phrase, whether it's the breath, whether it's a mantra, whatever it is that's the concentration practice you're doing. And to me, that's a kind of bridge between the wisdom practice emphasis and the loving kindness practice emphasis, because the capacity to stay with something, somebody, ourselves, that's the source of discovering the love and discovering the wisdom and all these innate beautiful capacities that our hearts have. So that's a bridge for me, because I also started with the wisdom side of things and understanding emptiness and those practices that nobody ever talked explicitly about love or loving kindness. It just would be like a wellspring, would open our hearts, the practices that we were doing of being present, of being with, of concentration, and would open that up, just as you said. So I used to wonder, why do this deliberately, since the other will get you there? But then that's when I really learned, Ali, about how focusing on certain spiritual strengths that we want to cultivate works. And I was skeptical about that at the beginning. Do you feel skeptical?
No, began to, see the value of just intentionally having those phrases done, especially done some, self-compassion practice also. So I'm just seeing the glimpse of it, but I also understand, and since that's my inclination of the wisdom side more, I mean, I see why people ask, just in the discussions comes up.
Sure.
And I also validate that just as strongly. I mean, it came up in the sitting group the other time that I said, this is and this. It's that and this.
Exactly.
But I understand totally the other side. When you go after the moment, this is like it'll naturally come up.
Exactly.
The loving kindness will naturally come up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trudy. Thank you, Jack. When I'm practicing loving kindness, sometimes I feel like I just end up getting stuck on just trying to cultivate it for myself, and I end up feeling guilty that I don't get to the other beings around me. And I want to know, how do you balance taking care of yourself versus being selfless in that practice?
I had a person come to see me who'd come to retreats a bit and been practicing, and hated the loving kindness practice. It was very hard and felt artificial or mechanical, and particularly, it was just, they were on the wisdom side and what is this love stuff and so forth. Although underneath it, it's really about this mystery of identity. Wisdom is, who am I really? And wisdom says I'm nothing, love says I'm everything, so we're exploring that. Anyway, so they went on for a while, and I made suggestions, what they tried, and it didn't work. And finally they said, do you have any other teachings or suggestions for me? I said, well, if I suggest it, will you do it? And they said, I don't know. I said, well, then I'm not going to suggest it. You have to say you're going to do it. I was sort of messing with them, which we can do sometimes as teachers. So he said, all right. I said, here, I want you to do a year of do no other practice. I want you to do a year of loving kindness for yourself. And he was like, that's the worst thing you could possibly have asked me to do. But he did it. And at times it was mechanical, at times he was doing it and hating me. It changed his life. So you could do a year or two or a decade of it, because what happens is that as you tend yourself, and as you open yourself to self-care and love, you become then somehow, like Ramdas says, he's not only loving all those people, but he's somehow a lighthouse that just carries love. And so love the guilt. Hold that as well. Hold all of that with love. It's a totally great thing to do. One more?
Is there anybody from our live stream? Okay.
They're all enlightened already.
Okay.
One more?
I think...
what do you think?
Yeah, sure. One more.
If there is.
You've so nicely grounded this, I was hesitant to ask this, but to what extent does metta involve, if at all, actually sending out an energy or a telepathic kind of... In other words, does the receiver on some level in your minds receive?
This is a very common question, and metta definitely involves sending and radiating our intention to love. And in fact, the first time when Jack took me to see the huge, beautiful golden pagoda in Burma, Myanmar, the Shwedagon in Rangoon, Yangon, one of the things I loved there is there are all these Buddhas with neon, what do you call them? Like halos.
Neon halos, yeah.
Yeah, like halos, but
Las
they're
Vegas
flashing.
Buddhas with all...
They're flashing and they're sparkling, and the lights vary they make it varied and different colors, and I just loved them. And I'd never seen anything like it. And some people were just like, this is a little tacky, but no. They were radiating metta. They were radiating the light of metta, and to what extent people receive it, I think they do. And I could tell some stories. It's too late now, but I will. I have told. I'll just tell one really quick. Really quick. My husband, George, and I were resident teachers at the Cambridge Buddhist Association, and the board of directors had put on the third floor somebody to spy on us, basically. And she would report to the board of directors that, if I left the hall light on at night, crimes like that. And I'll be honest, I really didn't like her at all. And so she was my difficult person in a metta retreat that I did. And I just beamed it out and beamed it out and beamed it out. And I came home. And the night I came home, she knocked on, she came down from the third floor. We had 2 rooms in the back of the house. The zendo was downstairs. She knocked on the door, and she said, I got all these, a gift of all these cosmetics, and I've been doing facials. Would you like me to do a facial for you? And I just like, my jaw dropped. Okay, so we became friends. We didn't love each other, but we became friends, and she stopped tattling all the time. Only big things like dust bunnies got reported after that. That's my quickest example of yes, it works. Very, anyway, a glimpse into what it's like living at the Cambridge Buddhist Association
when you're young.
In those days. We're going to sit for a moment now. So in this time of focusing really as a society on generosity and goodwill to the best of our ability, in that spirit we offer the goodness of our practice, whatever we've learned, whatever has been beneficial, whatever blessings arise from our practice, we offer freely to all beings everywhere without exception. May we and all beings grow our capacity for love and understanding. So I want to remind you that at 1 o'clock, Mag is going to be here to talk about her book, and please feel free to come.
Great stories, really beautiful writing.
Jack presented with her up in San Francisco, and it's just very inspiring. And so come back at 1 if you can. And I also want to remind you the donate button for the live stream friends that you can press, but you have to also donate after you press. And it's the same thing here. You can walk past that alms bowl and you can donate as you walk past that alms bowl. Just offer whatever will make you feel generous and happy. And thank you for your practice. I will see you next week. Thank you.